Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take your source material and really unearth the most important nuggets of knowledge. Today, we're diving into, a really crucial topic. It impacts anyone dealing with work-related injuries or, helping others navigate that often complex system medical narratives. Our sources for this deep dive come from excerpts titled, "What is a Good Medical Narrative?" And they really break down the nitty-gritty of what you need for successful claims. Our mission today is pretty straightforward. Cut through the jargon, show you exactly what makes a medical narrative strong, why it matters so much, and honestly, how a weak one can lead to denials, even when there's a real injury involved.
Yeah, and what's truly fascinating here is how this document, which seems kind of administrative, holds such immense power. It's really not just about documenting a visit, is it? It's about effectively telling a clear, evidence-based story, a story that directly links an injury or a condition right back to a specific work incident. And this narrative, it has to thoroughly document objective findings and support both the cause and the ongoing medical necessity, why the care is still needed.
Okay, let's unpack this a bit. So it sounds like this isn't just, a formality or ticking a box. It's fundamentally the core piece of evidence that an insurance adjuster or maybe a reviewer is actually relying on. What are the stakes if that evidence isn't, clear?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, the medical narrative is essentially the injured person's comprehensive story, but it's told through the lens of a medical professional, directly to the claims reviewer. And if this story is weak or maybe incomplete, the claim is very likely going to get denied. It doesn't matter how legitimate the injury might actually be. It's really the difference between being heard and just being dismissed.
Wow, that's a powerful statement. A weak story means a denied claim, even for a real injury.
Yeah.
So for you listening, whether you're an injured worker trying to get a claim approved, or maybe you're a provider writing these narratives, what's the ultimate goal here? What does the narrative have to do?
It really means understanding that the narrative must meticulously address every single element that insurance adjusters or OWCP reviewers require. OWCP, that's the Office of Workers' Compensation Programs, they handle federal employee claims. And they absolutely require certain things. There's just no room for ambiguity.
Okay, so if this narrative is the story, what are the essential plot points? Our sources really drilled down into the precise components needed. What are some of those key elements, the things that absolutely must be in these narratives for them to even, stand a chance?
Right. Well, we begin with the basics. Patient identification and background. Seems obvious, but it includes the patient's full name, date of birth, their job title, the exact date of injury, and any claim number available.
Okay, it seems basic, but what happens if even one of those little details is missing? Can that actually cause delays?
Oh, absolutely. Missing even one piece of ID can cause this ripple effect of delays. It forces adjusters to spend valuable time chasing down basic info instead of, assessing the actual claim. So after that, we need the mechanism of injury. And this isn't just saying, I hurt myself. It demands really specific detail. The date, the time, the location, and the specific work activity that led to the injury.
Why do they need that much detail? Isn't something like I hurt my back lifting enough? What's the risk if someone just glosses over those specifics?
That's a great question. An example from the source really illustrates this perfectly. It says, on May 2nd, 2025, while lifting a 40-pound box at the USPS distribution center, Ms. Smith felt a sharp pain in her lower back. Quote. See how precise that is? It clearly establishes the how and the where, makes it much easier to prove it was work-related. If you just say, I hurt my back lifting, well, it leaves way too many questions open for the reviewer. When? Where? How heavy?
I see. That makes sense. Okay, after the incident details, what about the patient's own history? Does that help clarify if this is genuinely a new injury or maybe, flaring up an old one?
Exactly. That comes next. The medical history, any prior injuries to that same body part, relevant pre-existing conditions, current medications, it helps establish a clear baseline, differentiate new injuries from pre-existing stuff. And speaking of the patient's story, after medical history, we get into their subjective complaints. This is what the patient reports: feeling pain, numbness, weakness, limitations, things like that.
But subjective alone isn't enough,
Yeah.
right? This must be where the kind of cold, hard data comes in, the objective findings to back it all up.
Precisely. Objective findings are absolutely critical. This means the physical exam findings. Things like range of motion measurements, maybe swelling, tenderness, neurological deficits, and also imaging or lab results. And importantly, with interpretations, not just a vague note saying, see attached MRI.
Right, you need the doctor to say what the MRI actually shows.
Exactly. The subjective reports, the pain, that's important, but the objective findings are what the claims reviewer can actually see and measure. For instance, the source mentions a positive McMurray test. That's a specific clinical test a doctor performs to check for a meniscus tear in the knee. It's concrete evidence.
That makes sense. Measurable proof.
Okay.
And then the actual diagnosis.
Yes, and the diagnosis needs to be very, very precise, using something called ICD-10 codes. Think of these as standardized international codes. They ensure everyone, doctors, reviewers, understands the exact diagnosis. Like medial meniscus tear, SA3.242A. Instead of just vague knee pain, it removes all the guesswork.
Okay, and then we get to what feels like maybe the most critical element, the one that ties it all together.
Yeah.
The causation statement. This is where the provider directly links the condition to that work incident. This really feels like the linchpin, doesn't it?
It absolutely is. You nailed it. This isn't just a formality. It's specific language that bridges the gap between a medical finding and a compensable claim. And honestly, it's probably the most common reason for denial if it's missing or if it's too vague. Our source gives a great example. It is my medical opinion, based on reasonable medical probability, that Ms. Smith's lumbar strain is a direct result of her work-related injury on May 2nd, 2025. It's all about stating causality using that specific phrasing like, within a reasonable degree of medical certainty or probability. Essentially, the doctor is signing off saying, yes, based on my professional opinion, it's more likely than not that the work incident caused this injury.
Wow. Okay, so once the injury is clearly linked, what's the plan going forward? That's the treatment plan and prognosis, is that right?
Correct. This outlines the ongoing care therapy, follow-up appointments, any restrictions, and, the expected outcomes. And right alongside that is the work status restrictions. Clear notes on returning to work, maybe light duty or total temporary disability, and crucially, with specific timelines. How long?
Got it. And
Finally, but absolutely essential, the provider credentials and signature. Full printed name, their credentials like MD or DC, contact info, NPI, that's the National Provider Identifier, a unique number, and of course, the date.
And the source really stresses keeping these narratives organized, professional, preferably typed, and repeating the basics in each new narrative, not assuming reviewers will dig up past notes. Why is that repetition bit so important? Can't they just look up the old reports?
That's a really critical point for efficiency, actually. Reviewers are often juggling tons of claims. They might not always have immediate access to every single previous narrative for a case. Sometimes different adjusters handle different parts of a claim. So repeating the basics, like patient ID and date of injury, in each new narrative makes it a standalone, comprehensive document. It just prevents unnecessary delays and confusion, makes their job easier, which helps you.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. To make this really concrete, let's walk through a sample narrative from our source that actually hits all these marks, like a blueprint for success.
Great idea. So for example, we have a sample here for John Doe, DOB, January 1st, 1980, claim, hashtag 123456, date of injury, June 15th, 2025, employer, USPS, job title, letter carrier. See how complete that patient identification is right there at the top? No ambiguity. Then the history. It clearly states, on June 15th, 2025, while delivering mail, Mr. Doe slipped on wet pavement, twisting his left knee. He reported immediate pain and swelling, and it explicitly notes no prior knee injuries in the past medical history. That's important context.
Okay, and then these subjective complaints are backed right up by specific objective findings. Reports pain rated 710, worse with walking or bending, denies numbness or tingling, and then bang, the measurable proof. Swelling and tenderness over the medial joint line, decreased ROM range of motion due to pain, positive McMurray test, MRI dated June 20th, 2025 shows medial meniscus tear. You can almost visualize that injury.
Exactly. And the diagnosis is crystal clear. S83.242A, tear of medial meniscus, current injury, left knee, initial encounter. No question what it is. And the causation, direct and unequivocal. Based on the history and objective findings, it is my opinion with reasonable medical certainty that Mr. Doe's medial meniscus tear is causally related to his work incident on June 15th, 2025. There's that magic phrase.
Perfect. Then the treatment plan is concise, actionable. Recommend physical therapy 2 ICE week for 4 weeks. If not improved, consider orthopedic referral. Clear next steps and a very clear work status. Modified duty, no squatting or heavy lifting for 4 weeks. signed by Dr. Kendra Pearson, D.C., with all her credentials listed. It really leaves no stone unturned, does it?
Not at all. That's what a good one looks like. So, given all these clear requirements, you might be wondering, why on earth do so many claims still hit a wall? Why do they get denied for insufficient medical evidence?
Yeah, it seems like it should be straightforward if you follow the rules. What did our source say is the #1 reason? I think it was something pretty fundamental.
It is. The #1 reason, very often, is a completely missing causation statement. Many providers just omit it. They don't write that sentence linking the injury to the work.
The ramifications of that are huge, right?
Massive. If that causation statement isn't there, the reviewer simply cannot approve the claim. Their hands are tied. There's no stated medical opinion connecting the injury to the work. It's an absolute non-starter. Another huge red flag is a lack of objective findings, where only subjective complaints, "my back hurts," are listed, without any physical exam findings or imaging results to actually back them up.
Right. And then there's things like incomplete history, maybe not enough detail about the incident itself or about prior conditions, or vague or unspecific diagnoses, like we said, just knee pain instead of that detailed ICD-10 code. How detrimental is that vagueness?
It's extremely detrimental. A vague diagnosis like knee pain doesn't give the reviewer enough information. They can't determine medical necessity. They can't figure out the appropriate treatment duration or type. Denials also happen if there's no treatment plan or work status outlined. Makes it impossible for a reviewer to know if continued care is needed or what restrictions should be in place. And of course, simply missing the provider's signature or credentials, that just invalidates the entire narrative. The whole document is legally void. The claim can't even begin to be processed, no matter how real the injury is.
Okay, now for the stark contrast. Our source gives us an example of a truly weak narrative. And trust me, you'll immediately see the difference. It basically says, patient hurt his back at work. He has pain. Recommending therapy. Signed, Dr. Smith. That's almost nothing. It's like the medical narrative equivalent of a, I don't know, sticky note.
Exactly. And for a claims reviewer, it's about as useful as that sticky note, which is to say, not useful at all. This is a perfect illustration of what not to do. It fails on pretty much every single level we just discussed. There's no date of injury, no mechanism, no objective findings, no specific diagnosis, definitely no causation statement, no clear plan. It's essentially useless. It will lead to an immediate denial, guaranteed.
Okay, so pulling this all together, for anyone listening, whether you're a healthcare provider actually writing these reports or maybe you're a federal worker navigating a claim and relying on these reports, what are the absolute key takeaways here?
Okay, for providers, #1, you absolutely must spell out causation every single time. Use those key phrases within a reasonable degree of medical certainty or medical probability every report. You also must be specific with diagnoses and the ICD-10 codes, no shortcuts, and document all objective findings, even if they turn out to be normal.
Wait, why document normal findings?
Because showing what's normal helps rule out other potential causes. It strengthens the argument for the specific diagnosis you did make. It provides a baseline.
Okay, that makes sense. And providers should also...
They should also keep narratives organized and professional, preferably typed, not handwritten if possible. And repeat the basics: patient name, DOB, date of injury in each new narrative. Assume the reviewer might not have easy access to past notes. Make each report a complete standalone document.
Right, that efficiency point again. Treat each report like it might be the only one they see.
Exactly. And this leads to a really crucial point for you, the injured worker listening. If your doctor's note looks anything like that terrible, weak example we just heard, you really need to advocate for yourself. You might have to politely ask for a more detailed narrative that includes all these elements we've talked about. Or, frankly, you might need to seek out a provider who is experienced specifically in federal workers' comp claims and understands these critical requirements. Not all doctors do.
That's really practical advice. It's also interesting that our source mentions the role of technology in helping with all of this.
Yes, that's becoming more common. Using standardized templates or even AI tools, the source mentioned something called a narrative wizard in AI advanced technologies, can really help standardize things. These tools can streamline the creation of strong, compliant narratives, making sure all the boxes are ticked. But ultimately, technology is just a tool. The treating provider is still the one responsible for telling that complete, accurate medical story. And without that complete story, the claim just stalls or gets denied, no matter how real the injury actually is.
So today, we've taken a pretty deep dive into medical narratives. We've really dissected what makes them effective and why they're so often the absolute linchpin for successful work-related injury claims.
Yeah, we've seen how a precise story, one that's backed by objective findings and crucially includes that clear causation statement, is just absolutely essential. It really boils down to clarity, detail, and solid evidence.
And the difference between a strong narrative and a weak one, well, it can literally be the difference between your claim being approved or denied. And that's regardless of how legitimate your injury actually is. It's a powerful lesson in clear communication, isn't it?
It really is. And maybe this raises an important question for you, the listener, to kind of mull over. Beyond just the specifics of medical claims, where else in your life or maybe your work might a really clear, detailed, and evidence-based narrative be the key? The key to successfully communicating something complex or maybe achieving a specific outcome you're aiming for. Something to think about.
Definitely food for thought. Thanks for diving deep with us.